You know that in 2017, 1.2 trillion photographs were taken. That's more than the entire history of photography put together. And 95 million photographs and videos are shared on Instagram per day. And the smartphone, unsurprisingly, is the most popular way to capture photographs. That is an insane amount of photographs that are taken every single day. So how are you going to make your photographs stand out with your photography? So the first thing I want to say is that all camera types are suitable for this course. Any camera can take a great photograph. You just have to learn how to use it. So don't worry if you think that your camera isn't good enough. There's no such thing. We're going to teach you how to get the most out of the camera that you are using right now. We're going to do that over 8 lessons. So let's have a very quick look at the lessons that are coming up. So our first lesson, this lesson, is what do you want to photograph? And in this lesson, I just want to inspire you. I want to get you thinking about your photography. I want to explore some of the different types of photography that are out there, areas that you might like to get into. Perhaps you already have in mind types of photographs that you would like to take. We'll also have a look at the very basics of how our camera works as well. And I'll get you some tips as well on how to get out there and start taking better photographs straight away. In our next lesson then, we're going to have a look at the basics. We're going to start taking control and demystifying all of the settings in our cameras so that you can start making use of all of those modes that are available to you. Lesson 3 will talk all about lenses. So we'll have a look at how our lenses work and how we can use them better to see the world through our cameras. We'll talk about composition in lesson number 4, so you can start seeing and thinking like a photographer. And really after this lesson, you're going to look at everything as though it were a photograph. Lesson 5, we're going to start really taking control over our cameras by learning all about shutter speeds, and we're going to be able to take photographs like this long exposure here that you see on the screen at the moment. That's a lot of fun to do. We'll have a look at apertures in lesson number 6, where we can control the depth of field and the amount of light in our photographs as well. And this is going to lead us on then to combining these together to get perfect exposures every single time. And then finally, we finish this module off by taking complete control, and perhaps this is the main reason that you're taking this course. We go to fully manual mode, so we switch the dial to the M mode and we take control over every aspect of our cameras. The camera no longer makes decisions for us. We make all of the decisions, and this will mean that it frees you up creatively to take the photographs that you've always wanted to take. So I hope you're all really excited about that. Now let me ask you a question. What is photography? Okay, so it's a pretty broad question. It's a pretty vague question. Type into Morpheus there and let me know what you think photography is. You know, is photography a science? Is photography an art? Is it a combination of both of them? It's almost a philosophical question. For a lot of people, photography is a way of understanding the world around them. And really, there's just no right or wrong answer to what is photography. But certainly we can break it down and we can understand aspects and parts of it to build ourselves a much better understanding of photography. And I suppose a better question is, what does photography mean to you? Now, on a fundamental level, photographs are simply time combined with light that are recorded onto a medium, whether it's our camera's imaging sensors or our film. So it's just these basic principles that come together: light, time, and the medium that the photograph is recorded onto. You may have come across this before. In fact, I can guarantee that you've come across this before. The exposure triangle of photography. It's one of the most basic fundamental ideas surrounding photography. Now, I often think that it can be sometimes overly complicated. Like this one here, we can see we've got our aperture, our shutter, we've got our ISO. We have all these different numbers, all these different settings: lighter, darker, blur, shallow, and so on. And we need to break it down and make it a lot easier to understand. And as I mentioned, it's light, it's time, so our aperture, our shutter speed, and our sensitivity. So ISO refers to our sensitivity, refers to our medium. These three combine to create our exposure, our final photograph. And it's about getting the balance right between each of these three elements, light, time, and sensitivity. That will give us a perfect photograph every single time. And this is what we are going to slowly build up throughout this course. But before we do that, we need to get familiar with our cameras. So let's explore all of the different types of cameras that are out there at the moment, or at least a broad overview of the different types of cameras that are available to us. Beginning with, as I mentioned, the most popular way to capture photographs in the modern era are smartphones. The smartphones are great because they're small and portable. Nearly everybody has a phone or a smartphone that's capable of taking a photograph. They're fast, they're easy to use. We have this great ability to be able to share our photographs straight away, which is fantastic because in the past, you took a roll of film, you either developed that roll of film yourself or you had to go to the shop to get it sent away. It could take a little bit of time. Well, now our processing came in. That was a revolution. It meant people could get their photographs while they were getting their shopping done. But now we can instantly share our photographs to potentially millions of people at once. That is fantastic. We've got lots of apps available to us for editing our photographs, for enhancing our photographs, for correcting issues we may have had at the time of exposure, or simply to allow us to become creative and to make our photographs look unique. They are limited though. We have a limited lens, we have a limited image sensor size as well. This is the size of the sensor that records our photographs. They can also be really expensive. The latest iPhone, the latest Samsung, they can cost a huge amount of money, but they are, as I mentioned, the most popular type of camera currently in the world. Moving on from our smartphones then, we have our compact cameras, and these were the standard for a very, very long time in photography. These were the way that the majority of us perhaps caught our photographs or had photographs taken of us by our parents when we were growing up. These are small and portable cameras, hence the compact. They're fast, they're easy to use. Many of them have zoom lenses to offer options so we can zoom in and out, if we need to get closer to something that's far away from us. So we have the ability to actually zoom in on a subject if needed. They still have small imaging sensors compared to some of the later cameras we're going to have a look at. So the quality may not be as good as our DSLRs, as our mirrorless cameras. But there's lots of different modes there available to us so that we can try out creative modes. We've got macro modes. We have a variety of shooting modes as well to help us fulfill our creative vision. They can actually be expensive in their own right, and particularly with the dominance now of smartphones, they are becoming a little bit redundant. So manufacturers tend to go towards higher end compact cameras that will be very high in quality, but will also be very expensive. But our kind of lower price bracket has almost disappeared now because of the popularity of smartphones. Then we have our bridge cameras. So bridge cameras are also sometimes known as hybrid cameras as well. And the clue is kind of in the name with these cameras. They're a mixture of the options that we'd find in our compact cameras, but also gives us lots of the features that we'd find in our higher end cameras like our DSLRs. So they're much larger size, as you can see even just from the photograph. These are really convenient for travel because they generally have very powerful zoom ranges. So we cannot change the lenses on these cameras, but they usually give us a huge range, a huge focal length, which allows us to have very wide shots or to zoom in very, very close on a subject. So they're great for budding photographers. So if you don't want to make that jump up into a DSLR or a more complex camera just yet, these are a really great option to explore. They offer more control over compacts and phones. They still won't offer as much control as our mirrorless or our DSLR ranges though. And as I said, they do have enormous zoom ranges, but the lens cannot be changed. So very often students ask me, can I change the lens on my bridge camera? It's not possible to do that. Everything is kind of built into that one lens. And they do have a limited quality compared to DSLRs. So the quality, at the end of the day, the image quality just isn't as good as you would get out of a mirrorless or a DSLR camera. Speaking of mirrorless cameras, so mirrorless cameras have absolutely exploded over really their kind of present history, very recent history. These are the forefront of camera technology, and in particular, Sony are really just leading the charge when it comes to kind of the technology surrounding mirrorless cameras. That's not to say that, you know, other camera companies like Fuji, like Panasonic, like Olympus don't have their own innovations as well. It's really exciting time for photography with mirrorless cameras. They're smaller and lighter than our DSLRs. And this is really what makes them more appealing than DSLRs. The lenses can be changed on these cameras. They don't quite have the same range of lenses that our DSLRs have, just because they're simply newer than DSLRs, so the range isn't quite there yet. They have large sensor sizes, so we have a variety of imaging sensor sizes available to us. There is 35mm sensors, full frame 35mm sensors. Don't worry if you don't understand what that means. We will be speaking about that as we continue on. As I mentioned, lens range is currently limited compared to DSLRs. They are expensive. Don't expect to spend less on a mirrorless camera compared to do a DSLR. In fact, in most cases, you're going to be paying as much or even more compared to a DSLR. So don't think that you're going to save money going with this type of camera. Unfortunately, pound for pound, you are going to be spending as much as if you were buying a DSLR camera. And in general, most major brands, Canon, Nikon, Fuji, Panasonic, Olympus, Sony, they will offer mirrorless options now as well compared to the DSLRs. And speaking of DSLRs, a DSLR is a digital single lens reflex. Digital single lens reflex. We'll have a look at what that means word for word in the next lesson, but basically it means you can change the lenses on the camera. To really simplify it, oversimplify it really, is that you can change the lenses on these types of cameras. These are the standard for amateurs and pros for decades, for amateur photographers, for professional photographers for decades. They're the highest quality and control, although, as I mentioned, mirrorless cameras really kind of challenge that now as well. Lenses can be changed. We have large sensor sizes here as well. Lots and lots of lenses available to us with these cameras. They've been around for so long. You know, film lenses can be used with digital single lens reflex cameras as well. So if you have an SLR, just a film SLR, those lenses likely can be used with your digital SLR, provided that they are compatible, provided that they are the same mount. Big price range available. In fact, it's cheaper to buy a entry-level DSLR now than it is buying an entry-level mirrorless camera. So that is definitely something to consider. They can be clunky and heavy. You know, they can be very large, like something like a Nikon D850 like we have on screen here. If you've actually ever held one in your hand, they are fairly big cameras. So that is also something to be aware of with DSLRs. It's a good idea always if you're thinking about purchasing a camera, if you're doing this course and you haven't bought yourself a camera just yet, to visit your local camera shop, to visit a camera shop and get a good idea of the actual size and feel of these cameras, because it is going to be very important in your purchasing decision. Now, so of course there is other types of cameras available as well, like our medium format cameras, instant cameras, like Polaroid type cameras too, but we won't be speaking about those just for now. Just wanted to give a broad overview of, I suppose, what I would consider to be the main types of cameras that are out there in the market at the moment. But let's move on now that we've got a bit of a better understanding of our camera types, and let's have a look at the types of photography that we can explore. Now, at this stage, If you're new to photography, you really should be exploring all the options that are available to you. Eventually, you might find a particular area that you really want to get into and that you want to develop. And really, in module number 2, we're going to have a look at the specific areas of photography so that you can improve upon them. But now, I just want to give you some ideas, some tips, and just give you some knowledge on how you should approach different types of scenarios and different types of photography, beginning with arguably the most popular area of photography, which is landscape photography. And landscape photography is brilliant to get into because it's a great way to get familiar with your camera. Okay, so that's one of the main things that I really love about landscape photography, is that it's a great way to explore and become comfortable with your camera. It'll teach you patience as well. Landscape photography, it's easy to go out and do, but it's very difficult to be good at it. It's really, really hard to become a good landscape photographer. And it's all about patience. And you're going to need a lot of patience in photography. You also need very quick reactions as well. But when you're photographing, think about the time of day you go out photographing. Light is usually best at dawn or at twilight. The sun is a little bit lower. It can be a little bit softer as well. You get these lovely colors coming in as the sun is coming up or going down. But that doesn't mean that you can't go out and photograph on cloudy days. That doesn't mean that you can't go out and photograph at midday as well. These are just guidelines. There's no rules as such. A rough guide to help you with your focusing when it comes to landscape photography is to focus about a third of the way into the scene. Now that's a very, very rough guide. There's a lot more to it than that. But to help with your focusing, try to find something, an object or something, or just try to guesstimate about a third of the way into the scene to focus on. And remember, not all landscapes have to be pretty. You don't have to go out and try to find a wonderful mountainous region like in this shot here. Think about your local area. Start locally and how you can photograph the world that is around you. And that doesn't always necessarily mean that it has to be pretty. And of course, make sure to dress appropriately. Make sure to wear the right gear, rain gear, boots and so on. And a tripod, which I'm going to be speaking about lots throughout this course, is a great investment. Right up there with our landscape photography in terms of popularity is portraits, portrait photography. And again, this is a great area to get into, but it's a little bit harder because you have to be a little bit more extrovert. You have to talk to your subject. You have to communicate with them. You need to have some kind of communication with them, when you're photographing people. So communication is key to getting good portraits. Focus on the eyes. You want to make sure that your portrait is going to have an impact. You should always focus on your subject's eyes, because that's the first place we make a connection with when it comes to portrait photography, when it comes to anything. We always make eye contact, and that goes for when photographing animals as well. Learn to use shallow depth of field. That's controlled by our apertures. We're going to have a look at that in lesson number 6. Consider the direction of light. Think about where the light is coming from when you're photographing your subject to make sure that you position them correctly, or see if you can use that light to create a really interesting portrait. You can also learn to control the light yourself. Learn how to use flash and studio lighting. That's covered later on in module number 3, so still quite a bit to get to that stage, because it is in truth a more complicated area. But if you can learn how to use flash and studio lighting, you actually also have the potential to make income for yourself as well. Think about who you're trying to capture, what you're trying to capture when taking a portrait, because really what you want to do is try to reveal a person's character, whether they're funny, whether they're maybe a little bit serious, or maybe they've just got a story to tell in the lines in their face. And as I mentioned, you've got the potential to earn with portraits. Portrait is a lucrative area for photography. So thinking weddings, fashion, beauty photography, commercial portraiture, and so on. The list is almost endless when it comes to portraits. Sports and action, also a very, very popular area. Sports photography is a very fast-paced and exciting form of photography. It is also a difficult area to get into. GoPro cameras and action cameras are very popular for this. We're all probably familiar with GoPros now at this stage. Those very wide angle fisheye kind of shots that we get synonymous with GoPro cameras. You also need to be very, very fast, so a good knowledge of shutter speeds is required. As I mentioned, we're going to cover that in lesson number 5 in this module. These are great to share on social media because these aren't kind of typical photographs that you're going to see, especially a shot like this where you're right in the action and everything's very, very intense. You really get this sense of living in the moment with a shot like this. Semi-auto modes are really useful here as well. So we have sports mode, which you may be familiar with in your camera, and we also have a continuous shutter option, which means that the camera will take lots and lots of photographs as long as we keep the button pressed down, as long as we keep our shutter button pressed down. Telephoto lenses are a great advantage here, so lenses that get us closer to the action. We'll talk about them in lesson 3. And start locally, visit sporting events in your own area. Now I speak from experience here. I picked up my camera, as I mentioned, when I was 15, and nearly straight away I was asked to start photographing local football team here in Dublin. Actually started photographing their supporters, and you know, that was an incredible learning experience for me. So definitely check local sporting events in your area, and always check as well with the person who's in charge if photographing is allowed. Don't just show up at some random event where perhaps there's lots of children or teenagers who are participating. You definitely need to check with the person who's in charge if photographing at sports events is allowed as well. An area that's not a million miles away from sports photography in terms of the approach is wildlife. And wildlife photography is a passion of mine, although I have yet to take something as stunning as this photograph here. Now, wildlife, you don't have to travel far to capture great wildlife photography. Think about the wildlife that's on your local doorstep, but you will need patience. Wildlife photography is all about waiting for the shot. If you've ever seen the kind of BBC One documentaries, the David Attenborough documentaries, they all do those great sections usually at the end of them where it shows how they got the particular shots, and they can be waiting weeks and weeks and weeks just for that one moment of magic to happen. Telephoto lens is a big advantage here to get you closer to the action. If you really are interested in a particular type of animal or bird, learn your subject's behavior, do your research on them, learn all about them, learn about their feeding habits, learn about their active times to give yourself the best chance of capturing them. Be very quiet, move very, very slowly. So you need to, really gain their trust and just not draw attention to yourself. Stay downwind so that they're not picking up your scent. Again, think about the time of day. As I mentioned, think about the time of day that animals are more likely to be active. You can also visit a local park or zoo for practice. This is a great way to practice wildlife photography. Just remember, if you are out in nature photographing in parks or the forest or anything like that, to clean up after yourself, make sure you leave everything the way that you found it before you got there. Now, we will also be looking at wildlife photography, an entire lesson all about wildlife photography in Module 2 as well. Obviously, there's a lot more to it considering our, current climate, everything that's kind of happening in the natural world at the moment. So do think about this when you are photographing wildlife, when you are photographing nature as well, how you might use your photography to also highlight current issues that are happening in the natural world. But that's a discussion for another time. Moving away from that, food photography. This is making me hungry. Food photography is also super popular, and this is really popular now, more so than ever, because it's in a way a lot easier to photograph food. Now, when I say easier, I mean we can share our photographs of food a lot easier than we were able to in the past, mainly because of Instagram. But it is actually a tricky area to make food look appealing. Like a photograph like this takes a lot of work and a lot of trickery as well to make it that you want to eat it. So with food photography, well, the aim is to sell the product. It is to sell food. Okay, so always have this in mind. You want to make it so that you actually want to eat it, or that you actually want to buy whatever it is you're photographing. Be patient. Your subject is not going anywhere here, so you can take your time here really to make sure that you get the right shot. Think about the viewer. Think about what you're trying to convey in the photograph. Like with this, you want the viewer to salivate, you want the viewer to want to go out there and maybe buy these ingredients and make something like this themselves. Certainly it is making me hungry. Go macro, get in close. So get in really, really close here when photographing food and product photography. Mix it up with angles as well. You don't always have to just photograph from above like this with something like food. Although that said, it is very, very effective, and smartphones really have a great advantage here. They're great for this type of photography because it is so easy to move them around and to change angles. And as I said, to share the photograph on Instagram or online pretty much instantly. And play around with lots of different props, play around with lots of different backgrounds as well to make your food look more appealing, to give it more rustic type of feel. Perhaps you're going with a different type of feel. Think about how you use extra ingredients, backgrounds and everything just to make the photograph look more professional. Now, an area that admittedly I don't have a huge amount of experience in, perhaps because I just shy away from it a little bit, is newborn photography. This is such a cute photograph. Newborn photography is a great way to make money as a photographer early on. So if you are thinking about getting into photography as a career for yourself, this is definitely an area to explore. But be warned, it is tricky. So when photographing newborns, first thing you need to do is understanding of lighting is going to be very, very important. You're going to need to have some understanding of artificial lighting. Communication is key here as well. Now, when I say communication, you're going to be communicating with the parents. And if you're photographing perhaps children that are just that little bit older, you want to try and connect with them as well to make everything nice and fun and playful. So shoots should be fun, friendly and playful. You do need to be very, very friendly to do this type of photography. You have to have a good relationship with the parents as well. They want somebody that is going to be approachable and somebody that they can talk to as well about the types of photographs they want. Avoid harsh lights with babies. You should avoid using flashes. So you want to try constant or continuous lights instead. So basically these are lights that are always on. So rather than using flash in this type of situation or strobe lights, that can really, well, first of all, they can actually damage a baby's eyes. So you want to use continuous lights instead. Also, travel to clients' homes. A great way to put them at ease is to photograph in their own space. So, you can get these continuous studio lights that are very easy to pack up. You throw them in the back of your car. You can actually go on location. And this makes parents, especially new parents, a lot more comfortable if they feel that they're in their own space, to get these photographs taken. And take time and be patient. You're dealing with a subject that you can't talk to, that you can't communicate in, and frustration will show in your photographs if you're not getting the shot. Just take your time, take a step back, and perhaps just try a different approach. And sometimes, the best photographs are the ones that we don't plan. And setting up a studio now is very, very affordable nowadays. So this is definitely something you do have to do a little bit of investment in, but the investment can yield very high returns. Now, just a couple of more areas to have a look at, and just remember as well, all of these areas that I'm speaking about, these are just general tips to give you to get you interested in perhaps types of photography you haven't thought about before. We will be having a look at all of these in much greater detail as we continue on throughout the lessons, as we continue out through the rest of these modules. So if there's something in particular that's kind of piqued your interest already, be sure to check out the entire curriculum on shawacademy.com as to what is coming up in the rest of the course. But moving on, let's talk about architecture or architectural photography. And With architectural photography, unsurprisingly, the subject is mainly buildings, structures, and interiors that are visually interesting. So architecture, it is, again, and I keep saying this is a difficult area, but all of these types of photography have their own nuances that you need to be aware of. So obviously with architecture, it can be indoor, it can be outdoor. Wide lenses are preferable for this type of photography. We're trying to get as much into the photograph as possible. So we're thinking about wide angle lenses, but this means you're going to have some editing, some post-production skills here to straighten out the lines in the photographs, because wide angle lenses will cause distortion. Like looking at a photograph like the one here, we can see in the background, typically if we take a shot like this, there is going to be a bit of curvature around the edges, which we're going to have to sort out as well. Look for shapes and patterns and repetition. So again, look at the shapes here in this photograph. We've got kind of a lot of square and triangular shapes here, which just add to the effect, the impact of this shot. There's a nice kind of juxtaposition between this building and this building here. Tripods, very, very helpful, especially because if you're photographing indoors, there is actually going to be less light, even though it might not appear to that to your eyes. To your camera, it will certainly appear like there's less light. So you're going to need slightly longer shutter speeds. For that reason, tripod's going to be important. Think about using black and white as well to enhance and to really bring out the textures and the details here. Again, this photograph's a really good example of that. And look up. It's so simple, but look up. It might seem like a kind of a silly piece of advice, but you just don't know what's happening right above your head. So when you're out there photographing, if you're out there walking the streets and you're taking shots, just remember to glance up, because you never know what you might see. Finally then, just to speak about macro photography, this is a hugely popular area in photography, and it is popular for a reason, because it's a huge amount of fun. Macro is, however, a very technical area of photography. There is a lot to it in terms of the lenses and accessories that we have to use to make sure that we get an effective, sharp macro photograph. And we'll be speaking about macro lenses in lesson number 3. There's an entire lesson on macro photography in module 2 as well. There is extension tubes and other accessories that we can use, but our cameras also have macro options as well, to help us get that a little bit closer. They'll help us to get that a few millimeters closer, which can make a big difference between getting the shot and not. Phones are excellent for macro work. You just get your phone closer to the subject and you can get a very high quality macro shots using your smartphone. And macro photography is so great because it's a great way to look at things in a completely new light, in a completely new way. But the key to success here is to master the technical aspects of macro photography. So I know a lot of you out there probably really excited about taking macro shots, so definitely stick with the lesson, stick with the course, because we will be going deep into macro photography at a later stage. But we are coming towards the end of this lesson, so we've covered quite a lot as well in terms of tips and approaches to different types of scenarios. But I want you to take away something that you can use pretty much instantly. I want you to get out there and start enjoying taking photographs. And I think these 5 tips will be key to getting better photographs pretty much straight away. And I've talked about it already loads, and that is to get a tripod. Buy yourself a tripod if you don't already have one. Now, I recommend that you visit a camera shop, try before you buy, because you need to make sure that you get the right one for your camera. And tripods are universal. Any tripod will fit any camera. When I say the right one, I mean to make sure you get the right size and the right weight that will suit your camera. So make sure to try before you buy, and if possible, try to buy the best one that you can afford. So that would be one of my top tips. Also, think about manual focus. Now, advanced autofocus systems in our cameras today. They're very, very smart and very, very clever at working out where to focus in a particular scene. Sometimes they get it wrong, sometimes they can be noisy, sometimes they can be slow, particularly when the light begins to fade. So think about going to manual focus as well. It allows for more seamless focusing changes. It won't always be useful, and it's not always going to be very fast as well. For sports photography, manual focus isn't really going to be very effective there. But if you've got a little bit more time, get familiar with using manual focus. It can really get you out of some frustrating scenarios when the autofocus just won't find what you want. So think about relying on manual focus in those situations. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I can't stress it enough. When you're photographing people, when you're photographing pets, when you're photographing animals, we make connections through the eyes. This is always going to be the first place the viewer looks. Think about when you're looking at paintings. If you go to a gallery, you look at paintings from the Renaissance and that. Think about where you look first. We always start at the eyes. So make sure this is where you focus when photographing people. And once these are sharp, everything else should look good. When you're photographing, think about mixing it up. Don't always just photograph from eye level. Think about getting up, think about getting down, think about looking up, think about looking down. Our bodies are 360 in all directions. So, mix it up. And, explore the world. This is what it's all about. Photographing is about seeing things in a completely new way and showing pictures to people that may not have thought about looking at something that's perhaps every day, and showing it them in a completely new light. Like this photograph here, taken by simply lying down, in a bunch of tulips. Now, of course, when you're photographing something like this as well, again, don't just drop down into a field of tulips. Always be sure, that these aren't protected fields or anything like that. But just think about the world around you, and don't just always photograph from eye level, because that very much becomes repetitive very, very quickly. So get high, get low, look up, look down, and just explore your subjects. And finally, for this lesson, probably the most important piece of advice I can give at this early stage is to enjoy your photography. Photographers tend to be very hard on themselves, and photographers tend to take a photograph and get frustrated very, very quickly. Take your time. It's not going to happen overnight. As your knowledge grows, your photography will improve. Experiment with what you can capture. So a lot of the areas of photography that we had a look at in this lesson, you may not have considered photographing them before. Perhaps you're not going to photograph them when you're going forward with your photography, but try it. Just try and photograph all these different areas. The world's out there waiting to be captured. So try all these different types of photography. You might find your own niche. You might find an area that you want to develop, but you won't know unless you try. Photograph new subjects. New things are happening around us all the time. So photograph new subjects. Look to what's happening in your local areas. Look what's happening in the world around you for inspiration. Visit galleries. Have a look at other photographers' work and photograph new subjects. Take your time with it and keep learning and improving. Photography is it's a lifelong hobby. It's a lifelong passion. It's something you can continually improve on, and I'm always getting better. At least I think I'm always getting better, but I'm always thinking that I can get better as well, that there's always still more to learn. And photography is this constantly changing thing. The technology changes a lot, and there's always something new to photograph. So just keep learning and keep improving. And share your photographs. Photographers are terrible for not showing anybody their work, but it is important to share your photographs. It's the only way you're going to develop. It's the only way that you're going to get feedback, and feedback isn't always necessarily going to be positive. And in fact, it's that kind of constructive feedback which is more valuable to photographers, because you'll know where to improve for the next time. And explore new ideas and interact with other photographers. Open your minds. Photographers should have very open minds when it comes to photographing. You never know what's going to end up in front of your lens. Eventually build yourself a portfolio. If you're in this to build a portfolio, you're on the right track, because that's exactly what we're going to do. Throughout this entire course, throughout these 32 lessons, you are going to have an extensive portfolio by the end of it all. And as I said at the start, don't be too hard on yourself. Photography is fun, so have fun with it. And it's when you enjoy your photography, and it's when you're confident in your photography, that you're going to take the best photographs. So with that, I do hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. Let's have a quick look though at what we're going to have a look at in our next lesson, in lesson number 2. So we're going to dig into how to actually use our cameras. So if you were hoping to learn more about how your camera actually works, we're going to have a look at that in the next lesson. So stick around. We're going to have a look at how your camera works. We'll talk about all the different modes and functions and features available in our cameras, what they all do, when you should use them, and we'll have a look at choosing the correct mode. So we've so many different options available to us on our cameras. When should we use what mode in what situation? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. Now, I also